Hey, this is Daniel Grove back to teach you another awesome way to use Photoshop. In this video, I'm going to show you how to clean up an image by removing distracting objects in the background. Sometimes there's things that creep their way into a photo that you can't move, aren't allowed to move, or that are just naturally there, like tourists, trash cans, traffic, things like that, that just kind of take away from the subject of your photo. And knowing how to remove those things with the variety of tools that Photoshop offers is one of the greatest superpowers you can have as a photographer, as an editor. So I'm going to remove a bunch of stuff from this photo that I really had no power over, except for this table. I probably could have moved the table, but I was in a hurry, so I left it. I said, meh, I'll fix it in post. So here I am, taking more time to fix it in post. So we're going to remove this sign here. We're going to remove my umbrella up here. We're going to remove my light stand leg here, and of course the table behind her. So let's get started with the sign here. Now this is brick, which means it's a repeating pattern, and you have to follow the pattern or it looks crazy. So before I actually get started with this, I'm going to duplicate the base layer so I have an original, and I can go back and forth and see the original when we're done. So first I'm going to use the clone stamp tool to get rid of this sign, and I'm going to follow the brick texture, which means I'm going to hold Alt, or on Mac it's an Option key, and I'm going to click right in the intersection of this T. I'm just going to call it a T, because that's where all the lines of the grout meet. It's a T. Now this T repeats right here. If I click in Paint, if I got to line it up perfectly, if I click in Paint, look at that. And when you're using the spot healing tool, it gives you a little bit of a preview in the middle of your cursor what's going to look like when I start painting. So I'm going to go right here, line it up with the T of the other brick, and I'm going to start painting. Now if I keep going, it's still going to see this sign that I've erased. It's still kind of there in the background. So I'm going to let go, and I'm going to keep painting because the brush is staying aligned. See over here on the right, that little crosshair? That's where it's sampling from. And on the left, where my brush is, I'm actually painting it there. And that looks pretty darn good. Now let's go back and forth, look at the before and after. Look at that. Pretty sweet. No one's going to zoom in and notice. That brick looks a little weird right there. No. Okay, so we've got rid of the paper. Let's erase this little LED card scanner. I'm going to sample from this T right here. Line it up. I'm going to make my brush a little smaller and just start painting very carefully. Don't overlap that door frame. Okay. Now you may notice, if you can see on the video, it's a little brighter here because over here it's brighter than it is here. So there's a few things you can do about that. You could sample from down here, get this T, which is actually darker, and just paint it in that way. You do want to keep in mind two things, perspective and brightness, when you're using clone stamping tool. So I'm pretty lucky this brick is flat to me and I don't have to worry about perspective changes too much, so I can get away with this. But if you got a wall that's coming at you at an angle, it's going to be a lot harder. Like this. This is a very noticeable angle. So let's see how this works. So I'm going to copy from this T right here, line it up. It's hard because it's dark here. Line it up right there, and I'm going to start painting and see how good this looks. If I just do a messy job of painting over this umbrella, which there's a beam here, oops, remember there's a vertical beam here that I need to leave room for. When I teach people about the clone stamp brush, I tell them it's a copy and paste brush. It copies from one area of the image that you'd have to tell it, and it pastes where you paint. There we go. That looks okay. There's kind of a repeating, kind of a dark diagonal there. But I could probably get rid of if I tried maybe copying from over here. Just kind of break up the pattern, really. You're just kind of adding some fake randomness. There we go, that's decent. And we still have one of the yellow ribs from my umbrella, so I'm going to sample from down here and just paint. There we go. It's pretty much black pixels there, so you don't have to do anything fancy. Okay, that's one item gone. We got about 3 or 4 more. Let's remove this light stand leg. Oh, actually, that's the railing from the steps, because these are stairs. So I'm going to sample from right here. S for clone stamp tool. Alt to sample right on this edge. And I'm going to line it up over here. I like sharp edges because it helps me line things up. There we go. Look at that. It's going away. Remember, you need to keep in mind what's behind your sample cursor over here. If I keep painting, look, it's going to paint brick. We don't want that. So I want to make a new sample from up here and paint on top of that. And that looks pretty good. No one's going to notice. We've got two duplicate things here. We've got kind of a brown something, maybe a leaf. I'm just going to use my spot healing brush, which is J, to remove both of those. Great. Now down here, let's sample from this part. Now watch this. If I sample from over here, which is pretty bright, and paint over here, I don't think it's going to look very good. See that? The brightness is very, very different. So let's erase this crack with J. Just actually fix some of the brick. And then I'm going to use my spot healing brush to paint it, because if I didn't remove that crack and I copy the crack over to the left, it's going to be very noticeable that it's repeating. There we go. Now there's still a little bit of a bright patch here. I could use maybe my burn tool very lightly to just darken that again. Make it kind of blend in with the surroundings. There we go. That's good enough. Alright, here's another leaf. I'm going to remove that with J, spot healing tool. Alright, let's remove this table. Now this is tricky because it's actually behind her. These other things have been easy. They're just on the outer edge and there's no overlapping of her body. So here's a great trick that I learned. I'm going to actually select her body with W, which for me gets me the quick selection tool, which allows me to just drag over her body, and it does a really good job of making a nice selection along her edges. Sometimes you need to add a few chunks or take away chunks. So there we go. I'm going to do select and mask, turn up the radius a little bit, click OK. So I have just her leg selected, but I want the opposite. I want everything but her leg selected so that when I do clone stamping or healing, it's not going to paint over her body. So Control-Shift-I inverts my selection. Don't do Control-I because that'll invert your colors, but Control-Shift-I inverts the selection that you have. And now, watch this. If I just use like my paint tool and paint, see that? It looks like it's painting behind her, which it kind of is because I have her leg deselected, but everything else selected. So let's undo that, and I'm going to start clone stamping this table away. Okay, so I'm going to sample from this T up here, and I'm going to paste it right here. Now where this table is kind of dark. I think her body is making an actual shadow that we'll need to fix later, or we can just keep this bright and make it, no shadow. And I went a little too far and I copied some of her her butt up there. I'll get rid of that later. So I'm going to paint with a little bit of a larger brush to save me some time. I'm going to go all the way down to the ground and see if this looks terrible. I need to restart my selection, so I'm going to grab from this T, which is the bottom of a T. You need to make sure you don't flip-flop them, or your bricks will look all crazy. There we go. It's lining up pretty nicely because, again, these bricks are pretty much almost straight onto the camera, which is where things get really nice and easy. Now this bottom part looks bad. I'll need to fix that later. There we go. I'll just leave that there. See how easy that was, that selection? I didn't have to do tedious pixel work. I just deselected her leg and just paint it away, and Photoshop Selections does the rest for me. Okay, so now we have the base of the table here. Let's clone from over here. Just paste here. Sometimes you need to restart your painting so you don't kind of start repeating stuff. And I'm going to copy this dark line over here and just cover up this bottom layer of bricks. There we go. Not my best job, and you can tell it's actually going back at an angle. So let's try to do that a little straighter. Because if you paint too high, everything will get offset after that. You have to do things straight across, and that's where things get a little tedious. There we go. Again, not my best work, but you get the point. Okay. Now the last few things I'd like to remove are some stray hairs, which you can use clone or heal. For individual hairs like this, I like to use the spot healing brush, just a real small brush radius, and paint directly over the hairs. Don't go over any skin or anything else. And about 80% of the time, it does a great job. The times where it doesn't work out so great, you'll need to get a little more clever and use the clone stamp tool. And if there's a lot of hairs, the spot healing brush will start doing its job and looking around and sampling from what's around it. So if there's too many hairs around it, it's not really going to work how you're wanting. But for this example, with just a few, kind of backlit stray hairs, it's doing a pretty good job. These right here, though, I would want to use, and also along her chin, I'd like to use the clone stamp tool. So I'm going to sample from this area, which is basically right here. Line it up. And let's just start painting very carefully. Sometimes it's better to do individual strokes. So if you screw up one little brush, you can just Control Z and it won't undo the whole thing you painted. It's a nice time saver there. You're welcome. You gotta have a little bit of imperfection with hair. Remember, it's not plastic. And over here, this is a little tricky because we got her jawline, but I'm going to use my selection trick. Just again with my quick selection tool, I'm going to grab her face. There's a few extra pixels in there I don't want. So I'm holding Alt to kind of refine the auto selection. Here, turn up my radius. I have my mask showing as blue. You can set that up here if you want. Just kind of helps me know what's selected. Okay. All right, now I'm going to deselect or invert my selection. So Control-Shift-I. Now everything else except for her face is selected. So if I paint, again, it's behind her. So now I can use my clone stamp tool very liberally and just have a great time erasing all those little stray hairs. Awesome, and there's only a few little artifacts here that snuck in because my selection wasn't great. I'm using a teeny tiny brush to fix those. Cool. So there you have it. Let's look at the before and after. Wow, that's a very cluttery photo. Very messy, very distracting. Do your best to clean up a scene on location, as long as you're not, moving moving private property or destroying a location. But it's great to have, like I said earlier, a superpower of removing objects so that you can fix photos when you're not able to do it on location. Well, thanks for watching, and I hope you're enjoying my channel, and I hope you'll return soon. Thanks.